So compulsory vaccines, what legal rights do people have over this? Joe Mackie is a lawyer at Slater and Gordon law firm. Joe, a very good morning to you. I don't know whether you have Austrian clients, but if you do and they don't want to get the vaccine, what would you be advising them?
I do, actually, and that's on the rise. First of all, I'd say mandatory vaccines are nothing new. Indonesia has been making the vaccine mandatory for the last year, and it's reduced their rates of transmission. So just to get that in perspective. But in terms of the employment cases that I'm seeing, I have people who just do not want to have the vaccine for whatever reason. And there are options for an objection. You can say that it's discriminatory. You can say that if you're actually going to be dismissed because of it, and remember in April next year, social care and health workers who are frontline will be required to be vaccinated. You can try and bring an unfair dismissal claim if that happens to you. But what we're dealing with at the moment is grounds of discrimination.
So those specific objections relate to, the laws that we're talking about perhaps in the UK at the moment. But in terms of a whole country mandating, as Austria is from February, that everybody must have the vaccination, what recourse in the law will they have then? Will they be able to challenge the government if they believe that this isn't proportionate, that they have a right to privacy to make their own decisions? Bodily autonomy is supreme.
Absolutely. And I've listened to the comments of your previous callers and those you've read out. And somebody said, well, it's not legal. And they're right, because right now it isn't legal. And the draftsmen in Austria are trying to make it law to come in on the 1st of February. I think it's going to be very hard for them. But in terms of a right to recourse and challenge, they have Article 8 and Article 14 of the European Convention on Human Rights in their favour. So you have one of those is the right to privacy, which means interfering with my body is something that I'm going to challenge. And Article 14 is the right not to be discriminated against. And if I say I'm vegan, for example, or I object to this on philosophical or religious grounds, excuse me, and I don't want to take the vaccine for those reasons, I'll bring those challenges. So there are legal rights to defence, and the European Convention will give those to the Austrians.
Joe Mackie, just clarify for those like me who were a little bit confused earlier. Of course, although Brexit has happened, we've left the European Union, we are still under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. So if that law was to be imposed here in the UK, we could still appeal to that on the grounds of human rights infringement.
We would use the Equality Act, which came in under human rights law, and the Equality Act is still good law in the United Kingdom, and it's a fantastic piece of anti-discrimination legislation. We would... You've seen probably recently some of the cases that have been reported on discrimination. You would use things like discrimination on the grounds of disability. If I had a particular condition that meant I did not want to have a vaccine, I would bring a claim under the Equality Act. And we do those claims at Slater and Gordon all the time and defend employees who have something happen to them that they don't think is fair because of one of the grounds in the Equality Act. So we have legislation in place. I can't see that we're going to mandate it in the UK. I would just add, we have a great infrastructure and we seem to have vaccination rates in the 80 plus percentages. We're not seeing the same issues here than we're seeing in Austria, who's actually got higher vaccination rates than in Germany, France, who I think might well follow suit. If Austria get this right, I think Germany, France, maybe the Netherlands will follow them.
So are you saying then that before this mandatory vaccination comes in at the start of February, there will be a raft of legal challenges and that this actually won't actually happen?
Well, I think that it's for the Austrian government and the Austrian people to put in their challenges now. I think there's Chancellor Schellenberg's in a very difficult position. He's got a massive rate of increase. He's got the fourth wave. He's got people dying. What else is he going to do? Because only 60% of people in his country have taken up the vaccine. And while he's got that going on, he's got to do something. So it's up to the Austrian people to challenge it now. But I think what the government in Austria will do is bring in legislation and they will then see the legal challenges to the law that they impose. And that's going to be something that I, as a lawyer, and many people obviously, will be fascinated to see how it plays out.
Fascinated, and I imagine that many people will be alarmed here in the UK. We've got a similar vaccination rate to Austria, don't we? I know that we've got more second jabs and boosters going in than they do, but we've got a similar vaccination rate. We're just lucky that our fourth wave happened at a different time in the cycle in terms of the vaccine and also of the virus, and also the climate at the time that the fourth wave hit, that we didn't have the same problem in terms of ICU and people actually dying from the virus. But people will be worried that if we're at that level of vaccination and we're seeing that what's happening in Austria, you know, although we've got a history of liberty and libertarian values here, never say never. People will be worried.
I'm sure people will be worried, and they have been since day one. You know, we eradicated smallpox because we had a vaccination programme that was mandatory. So there are positives to having this that you have to look at, as well as the negatives and the right to freedom and liberty. I mean, in the Victorian era, people were far more vocal, anti-vaxxers, for want of a better phrase, than they are now. I do think we have a higher uptake of vaccine than the rest of the European Union. I think ours are in the 80s, and the average for Europe is around 62%. And for herd immunity, which is what you need from a vaccination programme, you need 70%. So we're doing better. And I don't think people need to be too alarmed. The only thing we're looking at, and I think it comes in April the 1st next year, is a mandatory vaccination programme for frontline healthcare workers. Now, we already have that for people who do invasive care, like a surgeon or a dentist who has to be vaccinated against hepatitis B. And I think you can take some comfort from the idea that if you're, for example, my elderly grandma or my mother-in-law goes into hospital, I would like to know that those people looking after her have been vaccinated and are therefore going to be protecting her from getting something that will kill her. And let's remember that COVID-19 kills people.
Yeah. So actually, on that note then, Jo, are you expecting legal challenges then to the government's, decision to mandate health workers?
We're already seeing those come in. Yes, and we've seen those come in from people who work in care homes saying, I do not want a vaccine. And the grounds they're going to challenge it are on religious and philosophical beliefs. It's against their religion or it's against their belief. And actually, if you look at what different religious communities have put out, so the Muslim Council of Britain and, for example, and the Vegan Society as well, it's been a very reasoned opinion saying, yeah, we see the point about that. However, let's take care of our health and our lives and those around us. So there's a reasonable argument going on. And it's going to be interesting to see what the tribunals and the courts decide in those cases, which will happen in the next few months, I imagine.
But only on you can only challenge it on religious and philosophical grounds. Is that right? Because that's because if that is right, philosophical that could be quite a broad term.
No, you can challenge it on other grounds too.
Oh.
Excuse me. Disability discrimination, for example, would be one of them.
Okay.
There would be other ways to challenge it. You could say age discrimination, saying, I don't need it, I don't want it, I'm 17 years old, 18 years old, and the likelihood of me becoming very ill is very small. But what we are challenging it on is disability grounds, disability discrimination. We have some clients, and obviously I wouldn't go into details, but who are having chemotherapy or have had chemotherapy, have had cancer in the past, they don't want a vaccine.
So we may not even get to April then, and it coming in then. It may get struck off.
I think it will certainly, I think, come in, but the point being, I think we'll have to look at ways to manage people who don't want to do that work frontline.
And of course,
people who do, it's those who don't.
Yeah, and many of these arguments, of course, can be supplanted over to Austria as well. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Jo Mackie from Slater and Gordon, really good to talk to you this morning. Really interesting.